The exclusive contract novel of Feilu Fiction Network. Genshin Impact. Liyue opens a restaurant, opening century soup. Su accidentally crosses the mainland of Tivat, and activates the food and prisoners double door system. As long as you take the indigenous Tivat to the world of captives to enjoy delicious food, you can become stronger. So Su began inviting people to go. What he didn't expect was that those people went crazy as soon as they arrived in the world of prisoners of war. Qing and Ganyu. We don't want it, we don't want to drink things like century soup, because it really damages our image. Lay movie. Rainbow fruit, really can't be rejected. Zhong. In terms of universal theory, carbonated drinks are really addictive. Wendy. If I can't go back to my family, let me die in the sea of wine. Ningguang. If we could bring back the planting techniques of Sky Garden to Liyue. Feilu Novel Network reminds you that this novel and its characters are purely fictional. If there are any similarities, they are purely coincidental and should not be imitated. Chapter 1. Eating a meal, want to take your life to eat. Seeking fresh flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Tivat Continent. Liyue. Eating Tiger Rock. This is a famous commercial street in Liyue. On the street, people come and go, and the atmosphere of crowds is full. The stalls and shops were crowded with people, making it incredibly lively. And the reason for this kind of scene? That's because of the food and snacks here. Pedestrians who walk here will be attracted by various delicious snacks at 3 stops. There are also rumors that just stroll around this street. After coming out, you can immediately gain 10 pounds. Although this statement may have some exaggeration, it is not entirely false. After all, the snacks and delicious food here are really tempting. Moreover, the prices are mostly affordable and very affordable. So much so that passers-by cannot control their mouths. So almost every stall, store, and restaurant here is doing well, even booming. However, not all of them are. At least, there is a restaurant called Adventure Cuisine located 100 meters above the left side of Wanmin Hall, which is very deserted and bleak. Compared to other restaurants and shops, there is a significant contrast. Pedestrians passing by even disdain to take a glance. Even if some people with ideas go to the store door to learn about it, they quickly leave with a speechless expression and shake their heads. As for why this happened, that has to start with the owner of this restaurant. The owner of this restaurant is named Su. Jianmei Xingmu, 1.85 meters tall, with a uniform figure, handsome and protruding facial features, and an impeccable perfect facial shape. Wearing a modern loose white casual suit, it looks out of place with the clothing here. And from here, it can be seen that he is not an indigenous person here. That's right, he's a traveler. Just 10 days ago, he inexplicably arrived at Liyue in Tivat. And it also activates the food double entry door system. After understanding, Su learned that he could go to another world. The captives of food. Su is not unfamiliar with this world. I even yearn for it. After all, there are countless and diverse delicacies there. It can also be called a food paradise. Of course. Just going there is not Su's ultimate goal. Because he knew that it was full of crisis. Overall, it is a lack of security. The most lacking thing for an ordinary person without any strength in a foreign world is a sense of security. So, the first thing he thought about was to improve his strength. And of course, the system also has a way for him to improve. That's doing system tasks. And the task is also very simple, it is to take Tivat's people to the world of food captives to enjoy food, or hunt wild beasts, and then he can receive rewards or improve his strength. It is precisely because of these that he opened this small restaurant. On the plaque, there are 4 big characters written, Adventure Food. The purpose is to give customers a rough idea of what business they are running. This method is currently the most likely way that Su Su can think of to attract customers. However, it was not as good as he thought. At the beginning, it has indeed attracted many people to come over. After all, the characters on this plaque are indeed novel and intriguing. But with the understanding of these people, they dare not even enter the store. Or it can be said that Su Su may be a scammer. Where is there a meal to go to a different world to eat? More importantly, there is still a great risk, and customers themselves need to have a certain level of strength. Otherwise, if there is an accident, no one will be responsible. Do you need to sacrifice your life to eat a meal? This is so special, as long as it's a normal person, they wouldn't go eat it, right? Of course, more people doubt the authenticity of Su Su's words. After all, you can go to a different world and still open a restaurant here. Also, Su Su doesn't look like someone with that kind of ability. Don't say it's him. Even the powerful deities they are familiar with may not necessarily have that kind of ability. So, many people unanimously believe that Su Su is a fraud. I'm not sure what kind of trick to play, to cheat money. So 1 transmission to 10, 10 transmission to 100. Many people already know this thing. This also led to Su Su's restaurant being very deserted and bleak. Or there may be an unknown lover who occasionally approaches to understand, but then shakes their head and leaves speechlessly. 10 whole days. Su Su didn't attract anyone who dared to go out to eat and capture the world with him. But Su Su didn't care either. Because these timid people believe that he is a fraud, they are generally ordinary people with average strength. Even if these people go to the world of prisoners of war, they may not necessarily bring any benefits to themselves. On the contrary, it is also possible to lose one's life and bring unnecessary trouble to oneself. What Su Su wants is someone with slightly stronger abilities. Or it can be said that they are people who can hunt down beasts and become food hunters. It's because of this kind of person that he can perform system tasks. Sure enough, it's still a bit difficult to attract some slightly stronger people. I guess we'll have to spend another day in vain today. Lying on the lounge chair outside the store, Su Su shook his head, feeling somewhat helpless as he watched the people coming and going. But at the same time as he was helpless, not far away, 2 young girls were strolling side by side. Its posture is both soft and firm. The gentle one is the blue waterfall tail, with a pair of cute horns on its head, looking gentle and serene. Just now, she has purple hair, cat ears, and 2 ponytails, with a curvy figure. Her skin is fair and her legs are long, making her look serious. And these 2 people are Ganyu and Qing. Qing, let's go back and continue working. This place is really not suitable for me. Looking at the various delicacies on the street and the irresistible rich fragrance, the sweet rain stopped its steps and dared not move forward. She usually eats in a certain amount and doesn't dare to eat too much, afraid of gaining weight. But now that she is eating Tiger Rock, she is really afraid of not being able to resist the temptation. It's okay, Ganyu. Qing turned around and looked at Ganyu, and enlightened, saying, I finally managed to squeeze out some time. It's okay to indulge a little bit. Work is so tiring, occasionally relaxing can more effectively alleviate mental fatigue. Today, don't be like usual. You still can't let go, and my heart is very conflicted. But before she could finish speaking, Qing grabbed her hand and said, there's nothing to worry about. We have a store in front of us that seems to be newly opened. Let's go take a look. Later, without waiting for Ganyu's agreement, he forcefully grabbed her hand and walked forward. Chapter 2. Capital Tears Upon Reading. Seeking Fresh Flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Arrive in front of the store. Qing released Ganyu's hand and looked up at the plaque. Adventure Cuisine. The 4 big characters on the plaque immediately aroused her curiosity. Similarly, Ganyu, who was forcibly pulled over, also noticed the uniqueness of this store. Overall, it is somewhat interesting. But as they looked at the plaque, Su Yu's voice rang out. Two of you, but you want to eat. Ganyu and Qing's crystal clear and beautiful eyes moved away from the plaque and turned to look at Su Yu. They did not answer immediately, but instead looked around. After all, Su Su's attire and appearance are also very attractive. At first glance at Su Su, Ganyu and Qing couldn't help but feel relieved. Su Su in front of me looks very comfortable. Even though wearing strange clothes, it is not eye-catching. Realizing that she was a bit impolite, Ganyu didn't continue to scrutinize and said softly, "Yes, boss." Qing nodded and asked, "What food do you have here?" Su Su touched his chin and replied, "I don't have a menu here, and I can't give you the names of the dishes. And my store is different from other stores. I believe you have also seen the plaque, which is a restaurant with an adventure theme." At this point, Ganyu and Qing were stunned, unsure of why. Adventure. Su Su continued to explain. You can understand that if you want to eat delicious food, you must take risks. Simply put, food and risk coexist. Food and risk coexist. Ganyu and Qing furrowed their brows slightly, probably understanding something. So, if you want to eat something from your house, you must take a risk, right? Said Qing sternly. That's the meaning. Su Su smiled lightly and said, as long as you are not afraid of danger and have enough strength, you can indeed taste it. However, before embarking on an adventure, if both of you make up your mind, you must sign a death disclaimer. Otherwise, I won't be able to take you there. Speaking, Su Su took out 2 agreements and handed them to Ganyu and Qing. He also doesn't want to explain too much, after all, there is a more detailed introduction in the agreement. Qing and the other 2 were stunned for a moment before taking the agreement. But I didn't rush to sign, I looked at the content of the agreement. They want to see what the risk is and how they can sign a death agreement. The content of the agreement is roughly as follows. After signing the death agreement, Su Su will take guests to a different world. There are various magical delicacies in that foreign world. But if you want to eat delicious food, it all depends on the strength of the guests. If your strength is poor, you may even lose your life on the way to obtaining delicious food. Therefore, there was a death disclaimer. If you agree, Su Su will take them there. After reading the content of the agreement, Qing and Ganyu were basically relieved. But the 2 of them firmly believe in the content inside. I saw Qing looking at Su Yu and asking, "Is the other world in the agreement true?" Ganyu also stared at Su Yu with a curious face. "Of course it's true," Su Su said with a faint smile. "I don't need to deceive you 2 big shots, Liyue." Ganyu and Qing frowned slightly, somewhat surprised. I saw that Qing's tone was somewhat serious, saying, "Do you know us?" In her impression, she had never met Su Su. And I and Ganyu are usually relatively low-key. Many jobs are unrelated to socializing, and few people know each other. But why would Su Su know the 2 of them? Of course I do. Su Su slightly moved his wrist and slowly said. One of you is the Jade Heng star of the 7 stars of the glass moon, Lord Qing. There is also a 7-star secretary named Ganyu, who has lived for more than 3,000 years. How can I not know your name? As soon as these words came out, Ganyu and Qing were even more surprised. Especially Ganyu, with his mouth slightly open and his eyes wide open. Because Su Su not only knows her and Qing's identities. I also know that I have lived for over 3,000 years. This kind of thing is unbelievable. You should know that only a few people know about living for over 3,000 years. There are probably not 20 people in the entire Tivat who know their true age. Unexpectedly, it was revealed by a stranger who had just met. How can we not be surprised or shocked? After digesting it for a while, Qing spoke lightly. What do you know about me and Gan Yu's identity, and even about Gan Yu's life of over 3,000 years? Is it difficult? Are you a fortune teller? Qing can only think this way. Gan Yu also looked at Su Su nodding, with the same thoughts as Qing. Su Su smiled faintly and shook his head, saying, "No, I'm not a fortune teller. What I can tell you is that I come from a different world, so I know some information about you." After this explanation, Qing and Gan Yu also roughly understood. When I first saw Su Su, they thought that Su Yu might be a traveler from a different world. After all, Su Su's bizarre attire had never been seen in Tivat. Now, after being informed by Su Su, their conjecture has also been confirmed. As for their identities, it is not surprising to be known by a stranger. After all, every outsider who can come to Tivat is not easy. Looking at the way Qing and Gan Yu have already figured it out, Su Su continued to speak. "All right. I have already said what I should have told you. Next, it's up to you whether to sign the exemption agreement or not. Meanwhile, I can also tell you something. With the strength of both of you, even if you go to the food world mentioned in the agreement, the danger index is very low. So, I suggest you give it a try." Finally, 2 people who can help me with system tasks arrived. Su Su said to keep everything. Moreover, what he said is also true. Qing and Gan Yu do have the ability to stand firm in the world of prisoners of prey. As long as it's not a strong beast in the food industry, it probably won't hurt them. Moreover, Su Yu cannot take them directly to the food industry to take that risk. But start from the human realm first. Su Su's words stirred up the curiosity of Qing and her companions. Qing pondered for a moment and made up her mind. "Okay, I'm going. Then, you need to sign a disclaimer with a pen." But was stopped by Gan Yu's hand and said, Qing, are you really going? If you're going, what about work?" He is truly a work maniac. At such times, Gan Yu is still afraid that going to a different world will delay her work. A strong curiosity cannot stop her from giving up her job. Su Su was looking at the ground there, shaking his head, safe social animal. Those capitalists shed tears upon seeing it. As a model worker, Qing also hesitated for a moment. After some thought, I finally made up my mind. "It's okay, Gan Yu. We're just going to take a look, it won't be too long. Aren't you curious about that world?" Chapter 3. Go to the world of prisoners of war. Seeking fresh flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Gan Yu held her little hand tightly, feeling very conflicted. How could she not be curious? Especially when it comes to the fact that there are many delicious foods in that world. She already really wants to go. In the end, with a fierce heart, he finally compromised. Okay, let's go take a look. However, you must come back as soon as possible, otherwise work." Before she could finish speaking, Qing interrupted. "This is no problem." Then he looked at Su Su and asked, "Can we come back at any time when we go to that other world? If this problem is solved, then there will be no problem." Su Su didn't hide it and replied, "It's not possible to come back at any time, but we can guarantee that you'll be back within 10 minutes when you want to." Today, Su Su is still unable to teleport people casually. I learned from the system that he needs to improve his strength and complete certain tasks before he can achieve it. 10 minutes. After thinking for a moment, Qing could accept it and said, "That's no problem. As long as it doesn't take too long." Then he looked at Gan Yu and said, "So, let's sign, Gan Yu." Gan Yu nodded slightly. "Then sign your name on the death disclaimer." In Liyue, this disclaimer is effective. Su Su also inquired with a professional lawyer before daring to open an agreement. After signing, Gan Yu and Qing handed the agreement to Su Su. "Alright, now you can take us there." As they spoke, their mojong was already filled with anticipation. Su Su took the agreement with a faint smile on his lips. Finally, it's open. However, he was happy and did not forget to respond to the two of them, Qing. Of course, not a problem, both of you follow me into the store. Ganyu and Qing exchanged a glance, then followed Su Su into the store. And Su Su closed the store door, which was considered closed. Because he also needs to follow Qing and the others to capture the world. The store is no longer under supervision. In store. Ganyu and Qing's curiosity grew stronger. My mood also became a bit excited. After all, now we have to travel through a different world. This is something they never dare to think about in their entire lives. And Su Su didn't procrastinate, saying to the system in his heart. System, open the Food Capture World channel. Okay, host. As soon as the sound of the system fell, an energy gate appeared in front of me. It looks incredibly profound and profound. At the moment they saw the appearance of the energy gate, Qing and her companions were even more surprised. At first, they were a bit skeptical that Su Yu would deceive them or something. Nowadays, the doubts in my heart have been dispelled directly. Is this the portal to that other world? It's so magical. Qing looked at the energy gate and exclaimed in amazement. Ganyu, who had lived on the side for over 3,000 years, also looked unbelievable. It seems that the emperor doesn't have such means either. Looking at the two of them who had never seen the world before, Su Yu was somewhat speechless. But he quickly spoke up. Alright, both of you, please come with me inside. Soon, you will be able to enjoy various delicious foods. Speaking, Su Su walked into the energy gate first. Seeing this, Ganyu and Qing also followed in. Whoosh! The moment the three of them walked in, they disappeared into Tivat. When it reappears, it is already an unfamiliar world and environment. Obviously, it is the human realm where food captivates the world. Fragrant bread mountain, tempting honey tree with golden light, a whole milk river, with plant fries everywhere, roasted whole pigs scattered on the ground, and rainbow candies could be seen everywhere. There are too many to count at all, and this is exactly the scene that comes into view before the eyes of Qing and Ganyu. At this moment, the two of them were completely stunned. The scene before us is indescribable. The two of them were deeply shocked at this moment. How could there be such a magical and dreamy place? Even in my dreams, I can't dream of such a place. Looking at the digesting Qing and the other two, Su Su spoke up. Welcome to the culinary world. From now on, you can enjoy it to your heart's content. The food here is free of charge, it's enough. The only issue is to pay attention to one's own safety. Although the food in this world is delicious, it also comes with danger. The reason why Su Su repeatedly emphasized this matter. That's because if something happens to Qing and Ganyu in this world, so he won't be able to receive any rewards. So, he still hopes that Qing and the other two can be safe and sound. Upon hearing this, Qing and Ganyu blinked and regained their senses from the shock. The two of them had chest undulations and slowly exhaled before seeing Qing nod her head and say, "We understand, thank you for your reminder. But then again, I don't know how to address you." Qing finally remembered that from the beginning of seeing Su Su until now, she still doesn't know what Su Su's name is. Ganyu on the side also felt a bit embarrassed and scratched her head. It seems that I and Qing are a bit impolite. Upon hearing this, Su Su didn't hide anything and said with a smile. My name is Su Su, nice to meet you all. Miss Qing, Miss Ganyu. Then he reached out and wanted a universal handshake etiquette. Qing was stunned for a moment, but still held on to Su Su's hand. Nice to meet you too, Mr. Su Su. Next, it's Ganyu's turn again. Mr. Su Su, please give me more guidance. Su Su also shook hands with Ganyu, and he felt happy in his heart. Because of the delicate and smooth skin of Ganyu and Qing, the texture is really super good. After all, the time of contact is brief. Su is still somewhat unsatisfied. I thought to myself, if these two were my own wives, that would be so sweet. Cough. Without continuing to think about such things, Su looked ahead and said. So, start enjoying it to your heart's content. Qing and Ganyu nodded heavily. The two of them were already eager at this moment. Because the various rich fragrances emitted by these delicacies are already irresistible to them. If it weren't for maintaining the reserved demeanor that girls should have. So now the two of them have definitely leaked their saliva. Swallowed saliva. Ganyu took the lead and picked a bunch of plants that looked like dandelions. It can also be called dandelion cotton candy. And the color of cotton candy is even more dazzling, just looking at it makes one very appetizing. Is this really edible? Ganyu still doesn't believe that things picked casually in the wild can be eaten. Su approached her and smiled lightly, saying. Of course, give it a try. Ganyu pursed her lips and nodded. Without hesitation, he took a small bite at the dandelion marshmallow. Then he slowly chewed, but at the same time, his expression also changed. It looks very enjoyable, immersed in a soft and sweet taste. After swallowing it, she couldn't help but exclaim. This is also so delicious, it's really super delicious. Actually, Liyue has cotton candy. But compared to the cotton candy we eat now, the taste of that cotton candy are much worse. This is the best cotton candy Ganyu has ever tasted. Chapter 4. Is this still the Ganyu Qing that I know? You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Looking at Ganyu's somewhat exaggerated expression. Qing firmly believed it and said, is it really that delicious? Ganyu nodded earnestly and said. It's really delicious, Qing, you should give it a try as well. This is the most delicious marshmallow I've ever tasted. Then I'll give it a try. Qing spoke and casually picked a string of dandelion marshmallows. Then he smelled it first and bit it with a small bite. And when her lips touched the marshmallows, her complexion also changed slightly. Even if you haven't chewed it yet, you can still feel the soft texture of cotton candy. More importantly, that sweet aroma makes people unconsciously intoxicated. After chewing, the complexion became noticeably more enjoyable. Delicious. It's really delicious. After swallowing it, she couldn't wait to express her feelings. She, who originally didn't really like sweets, has no resistance to this type of marshmallow. If it's delicious, you can eat more. There's still a lot left. Watching Qing and the others eating happily, Su Yu's mood inexplicably improved. Of course, there is also a reason for this. Because the happier the two of Qing ate, the higher the emotional value feedback was given to him. The higher the emotional value, the more generous the reward the system gives him. Overall, the improvement of Su's strength is closely related to the people he brought from Tivat. The higher they eat, the better the reward they receive. Well, we won't be polite. Qing responded with a statement that her expression did not resemble that of a polite person. After all, I finally arrived at this food paradise. Whatever you say, enjoy it thoroughly. Ganyu is no exception. At this moment, he has already put aside the idea of gaining weight by eating too much and continues to eat the dandelion cotton candy in his hand. While eating, I didn't forget to call Su. Su, you also come and eat together. It's really delicious. Okay, thank you for the invitation. Subsequently, Su also picked up a string of dandelion marshmallows and ate them casually. Don't say it, it's really delicious. The feeling of just right softness and sweetness is really great. The cotton candy that is usually sold on the street is mostly based on technology and ruthlessness. But the cotton candy here grows naturally and has a natural taste. Even if you eat more, you won't feel bored. It's truly a food world, and the cuisine here is truly unparalleled. Su Su couldn't help but marvel in his heart. This is just the most common delicacy. If it's those rarer and more precious delicacies. How delicious is that? Su Yu, who had seen food prisoners before, felt that when Ali and those people enjoyed the food, their expressions were too exaggerated and exaggerated. But now, after experiencing it firsthand, he realized it was true. The food here is really irresistible. What is this, a cake? Ganyu has discovered new delicacies again. It looks like a small hill, but it is wrapped in thick cream. And there is a strong milk aroma wafting around. Is that right? Just give it a try and you'll know. Qing also followed suit, Meimuiyang. While speaking, she didn't know where to pull out something like a spoon. Then scoop it onto the small hill wrapped in cream. In the next moment, a full spoonful of cream appeared in the spoon. So, let me give it a try first. Speaking, she couldn't wait anymore. After all, this cream looks really delicious. On the side, Ganyu also stared at her with an expectant expression. And in the next moment, she took a small bite directly at the cream on the spoon. At the moment of entering, she unconsciously let out a low moan. His face also changed rapidly from normal, appearing extremely enjoyable. Almost no chewing is needed, and the cream slips into the throat. Very delicate, silky, and soft, it melts immediately upon entry. And that kind of sweetness is very unique, no matter how you eat it, you won't feel greasy. So delicious. Another word of praise came from her mouth. And it seemed that the cream was still stuck in her throat, so her voice became much softer. Seeing Qing's somewhat intoxicated expression, Ganyu couldn't sit still. Turning around, I didn't know where to take out a spoon. Then he scooped a full spoonful towards the cake hill. Without any hesitation, he took a small bite directly to his mouth. Unconsciously let out a low moan. The stunning face became intoxicated. In the next moment, I couldn't help but express my feelings. Delicious. It's really super delicious. Is this really cream? I have never tasted such delicious cream before. After finishing the praise, I continued to eat. The same goes for Qing on the side. I can't stop at this moment, completely immersed in it. Seeing the two of them eating so well, Suyu was also a bit exaggerated. He walked over and casually scratched with his fingers, putting it in his mouth. Then, his expression quickly became intoxicated with Qing and the two of them. To be honest, it's really delicious. But this was also expected by Suyu. There are too many such delicacies in this world. Clatter 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 clatter. In just a few minutes, Qing and Ganyu ate a mouthful of cream. Even my face has a lot of stickiness. At this moment, they are not as peaceful as before. Hee, your faces. Su looked at their faces and couldn't help but chuckle. At this moment, Qing and her companions finally stopped eating. Ganyu looked at Su and asked weakly. What's wrong with our faces? Qing also had a skeptical expression on her face, completely unaware of her current image. Su explained their situation. It's not much, it's just some cream. But it looks so cute. As soon as these words were spoken, Qing and Ganyu blushed with embarrassment. Slightly bowing his head, he was too nervous to look directly at Su. After all, it's the first time they've been praised for being cute. And also a member of the opposite sex. As a Liyue Yuhengxing, I have solved many big problems in my daily life. A semi-immortal who lived for over 3,000 years has also experienced many things. But at this moment, the two remained silent. I couldn't think of how to respond to Su Su at once. In this regard, they are clearly very inexperienced. Seeing the awkward atmosphere, Su Su took out 2 tissues from his pocket and handed them over. Here, wipe the cream off your face. Upon hearing these words, the 2 raised their heads and took the tissue. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It is obvious from their tone that they have not fully recovered yet. Seeing this scene, Su Su also felt a bit overwhelmed with tears and laughter. These 2 girls are really fun. Wait for Qing and the 2 to wipe off the cream on their faces. Su Su looked at a river not far ahead and spoke. I think we can give River Fresh a try. Chapter 5. Prawns and crabs more tasty than golden shrimp balls. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ah. Ganyu let out a sigh and stuttered. Are you going to eat River Fresh food, but I? She really wants to say that she doesn't eat meat. But even without saying it, Su Su and Qing knew what she was going to say. It's okay if you don't eat, Ganyu, said Qing lightly patting her shoulder, there's more than just meat and fish over there. Let's go take a look together, maybe there's something even better than cream. Speaking of which, Qing still looks forward to what Su Su called River Fresh food. After all, she still prefers seafood. In Liyue, her favorite food is golden shrimp balls. I also love other river delicacies. Of course, it also needs to be in a situation that suits the taste. After Qing finished speaking, Su Su smiled and agreed. That's right, there are not only river delicacies over there, but also many other delicacies. Go over there, maybe there's a new discovery. With this statement, Ganyu began to look forward to it. Anyway, as long as it's not fishy, it's easy to say. Okay, let's go then. Ganyu pinched her fingers and said softly. Su Su and Qing nodded. Then he immediately walked towards a long river in front of him. In a few minutes, we have arrived at the riverbank. Look, what are those? As soon as she arrived at the riverbank, Qing was surprised to discover a new species. The upper body looks like a hairy crab, and the lower body looks like a lobster tail. Simply put, it is a combination of lobster and crab. Although it's a combination, it doesn't look ugly at all. And the whole body seems to have been steamed, with a golden red body emitting a steaming aroma. This is a big shrimp crab. Su Su beside him began to popularize science. He knows most of the creatures in this world with the information provided by the system. Big shrimp and crab. What a strange name. Qing scratched her head, feeling very strange. Ganyu on the side also bit her lips, feeling a bit strange. But I didn't think much about it either. After all, they all know that this is a different world. Many things cannot be understood according to common sense. So, can that be eaten? Qing's eyes never left the big shrimp and crab, because the rich aroma it emitted had already made her want to taste it. Of course, Su Su replied. Upon hearing that it was edible, Qing did not hesitate. The jade hand reached out and aimed at a large shrimp and crab in front of him, driving the elemental force. Zizi, in the next moment, an electric current rushed out of her palm, directly stunning the big shrimp and crab. Then he exerted a force under his feet and rushed over to pick up the fainting shrimp and crab in his hand. Turning around and looking at Su Su, he asked. Su Su, does this need to be cooked? Or can it be eaten directly? After all, big shrimp and crabs are living creatures, and Qing believes that they should be cooked before they can be eaten. Of course you can eat it directly. Su Su walked up to her and said lightly. Actually, eating directly is more primitive and delicious than cooking. In this world, many delicacies can be eaten directly without cooking. On the contrary, some foods have the opposite effect after cooking. After hearing Su Su's words, Qing gave a rare smile and said. I understand, thank you for informing me. However, how should I eat this? She paused and lowered her head awkwardly. After all, she has never eaten such a big river delicacy before. This one alone weighs at least 20 pounds. It can be said that there is no place to start. Or perhaps they are afraid that if they eat in the wrong order, something will be missing. Su Su shook his head and said, "There's not much complicated order. Eat whatever you want. Just follow the way you usually eat river fresh seafood. Oh, let me give it a try." As she spoke, she continued to exert elemental power and forcefully electrocuted the big shrimp and crab. After all, eating live animals directly is really hard for her to swallow. And that would be too cruel. It can kill animals, but it won't harm them. After the big shrimp and crab died, she broke off a big crab leg and handed it to Su Su. "Here, Su Su, you can also try it." "Thank you," Su Su said without hesitation. After all, he has never tasted the taste of big shrimp and crab before. "You are welcome." After replying with a polite remark, Qing's gaze turned to Ganyu. Ganyu immediately waved his hand and shook his head. "No, I don't need it anymore." "You can eat it." As a vegetarian, Ganyu has a strong aversion to meat and fish. Of course, Qing also knows. But out of courtesy, she definitely wants to ask. "Since that's the case, then Su Su and I will start eating." Ganyu nodded slightly. Next, Qing will no longer be polite. Actually, she was already eager to taste it. After all, just smelling that unique fresh fragrance has made her a bit overwhelmed. No more nonsense. She directly broke off the other thigh and then gently pinched it. Kaka, the crisp sound of breaking shells rang out. The shell of this big shrimp crab is not actually hard, but rather very fragile. It can be crushed with just a little force, and it's easy to peel. Qing peeled off half of the shell and revealed the fresh, juicy, and plump shrimp and crab meat. The shrimp and crab meat is crystal clear and steaming hot. It feels like it's just taken out of the steamer. Qing couldn't help but say, "I'm going to eat." Under the gaze of Su Yu and Ganyu, she took a bite. The tight and delicate taste made her unconsciously moan softly. Next is chewing. Her little mouth slowly chewed and looked even a bit cute. But at this moment, she can't even care about these things. Xiantian contains a variety of river fresh flavors that impact her taste buds. In an instant, she received unprecedented satisfaction. The river delicacies I have eaten before are not worth mentioning in front of this big shrimp and crab. Even if it was my favorite food before, the most recognized golden shrimp balls could not be compared. Okay, it's delicious. Eat it well. After swallowing it, he once again expressed his feelings. Ganyu was a bit tempted to try when he saw her behaving in such a bad way. But in the end, she still gave up. She still can't accept the meat here. At this moment, Su Su couldn't help but crush and peel off the big clamp leg that Qing had just given him, and then put it to his mouth to take a bite and chew. Similarly, the tight, tender, and juicy taste made his pupils shrink abruptly. This is not intentional of him, but rather an instinctive reaction of the senses. Various river delicacies mixed together to create a unique and fresh fragrance that shook his brain. That feeling is very pleasant. It's really not bad. After swallowing it, he couldn't help but praise it. Afterwards, he continued to attack the remaining flesh in his hand. Brushing and pulling in just 1 minute, I ate everything thoroughly. But Su Su still has some lingering desires. But at this point, he didn't continue to eat. After all, it's not good for Ganyu to wait on the side. P.S. Newcomers and new books, the first day release data is very important. If you think it's okay, please provide some Flower monthly tickets and review tickets to support it. Chapter 6. Century Soup. Seeking Fresh Flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. More importantly, If Ganyu doesn't eat anything, the system will not give him as much feedback. So, weigh the pros and cons. He cannot let Ganyu stop. Taking out a tissue and wiping his mouth, Su Su looked at Ganyu and chuckled lightly. Miss Ganyu, since you don't eat meat, you can try that one. Su Su said, pointing his finger at the plant that looked like a lotus root growing in the middle of the river. To be more precise, it's lotus root soup. Upon hearing this, Ganyu looked in the direction pointed by Su Su. Then I discovered a green lotus leaf and flower blooming on the water surface. The lotus leaves are filled with steaming water vapor. Even if it is several tens of meters away from there, one can still smell a unique fragrance. Ganyu had a surprise in her eyes and asked softly. What is that? Can it be eaten? Actually, there's no need to ask, she probably knows she can eat it. Because there is no meat or fishy smell from the fragrance. It's completely plain. Of course you can eat it. Su Su walked up to her and said calmly. That kind of soup wrapped in lotus leaves should be very delicious. Soup. Ganyu kneaded her small hand, feeling a bit eager to try. Let's go get some to drink. Su Su nodded. Ganyu didn't talk nonsense anymore. Go straight to the water's edge. Upon reaching the water's edge, she immediately drove the elemental force. Buzz. In an instant, the river directly formed an ice road leading to the lotus flowers and leaves. Su Su couldn't help but marvel at it. This method is really not bad. After opening the ice road, Ganyu turned around and said to Sushiro in a voice. Mr. Su Su, let's go. Speaking, he looked at Qing again and called her up. Qing is still reluctant to let go of the big shrimp and crab. But I also want to see what delicious food Su Su and Ganyu have discovered. In addition, in order to maintain some image, I temporarily gave up on the big shrimp crab and came to Su Su and Ganyu's side. Ganyu, Mr. Su Su, did you find anything delicious again? The first sentence that came over, Qing asked curiously. It's a lotus root soup, let's go over there. Su Su casually answered and then walked towards the ice. Ganyu and Qing also followed behind. Although it's on ice, it's not slippery. Because Ganyu intentionally added some anti-slip patterns on the icy road. In just 1 minute, Su Yu and the others arrived at the lotus leaf. Is this lotus root soup? Okay. It's so magical. Seeing the heat emanating from the curled lotus leaves and a strong fragrance of lotus root, Qing and Ganyu couldn't help but be shocked again. I didn't expect nature to be so magical. Even soup can be generated on its own. Su Su, on the other hand, seemed somewhat indifferent. Although it was also the first time he had seen a naturally occurring lotus root soup. But the world of food captives is inherently so magical. This is just one of the normal phenomena. Miss Ganyu, Miss Qing, let's have a try. Compared to others, Su Su still cares more about his tasks. Because only the emotions generated by Qing and Ganyu while enjoying delicious food can bring him benefits. Ganyu and Qing nodded heavily. Subsequently, Ganyu once again drove the elemental power. Unexpectedly, a simple set of tableware floated out of thin air in front of me. There are bowls, spoons, chopsticks, and spoons. This left Su Su speechless. Does this guy still carry tableware with him? Indeed, the world of foodies is crazy. But Su Su didn't say anything either. At this moment, having these things can indeed help you better taste lotus root soup. Ganyu took the initiative to grab a bowl and a spoon, scooped up half of the bowl from the lotus leaves, and first handed it to Su Su. Mr. Su Su, you drink first. Su Su wouldn't refuse this kind of gentle and polite Ganyu. Taking the lotus root soup, staring at Ganyu's gentle face, he gently thanked her. Thank you. Ganyu was a bit shy, and her eyes unconsciously dodged. No, you're welcome. To alleviate this embarrassment, Ganyu picked up another bowl and scooped another one for Qing. Thank you. Ganyu imitated Su Su's tone, with a teasing tone. This made Ganyu's face even redder. You. Qing you. Qing smiled happily and found it very amusing. Then Ganyu ignored her and scooped himself a bowl. And at this moment, the three of them were not in a hurry to taste it, but unconsciously closed their eyes and smelled it, feeling the rich and fresh scent of lotus roots makes one feel a bit refreshed. After swallowing saliva, Ganyu couldn't help but be the first. So, I'm going to start. Speaking, Ganyu scooped a spoonful with a spoon and slowly placed it on his mouth, elegantly pouring it into his mouth. As soon as the lotus root soup entered her mouth, Ganyu unconsciously raised her eyes. A hint of drunkenness blushed on his face, and his expression was incredibly enjoyable. So fresh, so sweet, so delicious. This is the first feeling after Ganyu swallowed it. Qing couldn't sit still anymore and scooped up a spoonful and poured it into her mouth. Her expression was slightly different from Ganyu's, her eyes suddenly widened in an instant. Seems to be subjected to some strong impact. But in the next moment the expression changed, revealing a face that enjoyed sweetness. Really? Really good. This is too delicious. It's the first time I've tasted such delicious soup. At this moment, Qing felt like she was living in vain. The soup I drank in Liyue before is not worth mentioning in front of this lotus root soup. Sure enough, this time, I took the risk and came right. Su Su looked at the feeling of enjoyment they had, and the corners of his mouth curved. The more they enjoy it, the better the reward they receive from feedback. This is also what Su Su wants to see the most. While feeling happy, Su Su also scooped up a spoonful and poured it into his mouth. And that fresh and unique taste satisfies the taste buds. And he couldn't help but exclaim. Indeed delicious. In the soup, it can be considered top-notch. Upon hearing these words, Ganyu and Qing agreed and nodded seriously. However, Ganyu felt that the description was not enough, and added. I think even the top cannot describe the deliciousness of this soup. It should be the most delicious soup in the world. Qing finished the soup in the bowl and, while satisfied, nodded. It is truly unique in the world, unparalleled. However, Su Su shook his head. That's not necessarily true. This made Qing and Ganyu curiously stare at his stern face. Not necessarily. Is there any soup in this world that tastes better than this one? Su Su touched his chin and nodded, saying. Indeed. In this world, lotus root soup can only be considered delicious, but it is not unique. There is a soup that is much more delicious than it. Listening to Su Su's words, the beauty of Ganyu and Qing was slightly magnified, and their curiosity became incredibly strong. Ganyu couldn't help but ask softly. What soup is more delicious than lotus root soup? Su Su smiled faintly and said 4 words calmly. Century soup. P.S. Newcomers and new books, the first day release data is very important. If you think it's okay, please provide some Flower monthly tickets and review tickets to support it. Chapter 7. Even Zhongli has to give up. Seeking fresh flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Century thick soup. Ganyu and Qing spoke these 4 words in unison. That's right. Su Su took a few steps and said expressionlessly. In this world, century soup is definitely top-notch. It's definitely much better than the lotus root soup I drink now. I'm joking. It's the essence soup that took a century to form. How can this ubiquitous lotus root soup be compared to it? Upon hearing Su Su's words, Ganyu and Qing became somewhat excited. A soup that tastes even better than lotus root soup. They can't imagine how delicious it really is. At this moment, their desire to drink century thick soup is incredibly strong. I saw Gan Yu holding her hands together, her eyes burning as she looked at Su Su, her voice carrying a hint of pleading. So, can Mr. Su Su take us to try it? Qing couldn't contain her heart that wanted to drink century-thick soup. She clenched her small fist and quickly agreed. Yes, Mr. Su Su, is that okay? Gan Yu and I really want to have that soup. After thinking for a moment, Su Su nodded and said. Sure. Coincidentally, in the information from the search system just now. Today happens to be the time when century-thick soup formed. If Qing and Gan Yu want to drink, there is still a chance. Moreover, Su Su also wanted them to drink that kind of soup. Because the benefits and feedback it brings to oneself are definitely stronger. After all, the higher the emotional satisfaction of guests enjoying delicious food, the better the more rewards the system can offer. Gan Yu and Qing were unaware of Su Su's thoughts. Upon hearing Su Su's words, he simply agreed to them. At the moment, feeling extremely happy in her heart, Qing smiled and said. Thank you then, Mr. Su Su. Gan Yu also nodded on the side, grateful to Su Su in her heart. Su Su waved his hand and smiled lightly, saying. Yes, they are all friends, there's no need to thank them. Also, you don't need to call me Mr. Su Su, just call me Su Su. Calling him Mr. Su Su seems too far-fetched. This is Su Su's planned future wife, we need to bring her closer together. Qing also showed a faint smile and said, okay, from now on, you can just call me Qing. Gan Yu also spoke softly on the side. And me, just call me Gan Yu. Being able to establish a closer relationship with Su Su is actually what they hope for. Let's not talk about Su Su's character for now. Just because Su Su can bring people to this magical culinary world, it can make them feel closer. Knowing such a person would be beneficial and helpful to them, even to Liyue. Okay, Su Su nodded with a smile on his face as he spoke, he remembered something and said. However, there may be some risks involved in drinking century soup. There are many fierce beasts in the place where century-thick soup exists. And there will also be people from this world competing. Of course, your strength should be able to ignore those factors. But unexpected things may also happen. Therefore, you need to consider carefully whether or not to go. Although the strength of Qing and Gan Yu is strong. But there are also people in this world who are stronger than them. Leaving aside the beasts and kings of the culinary world. There are also humans in the human world who have stronger combat power than them. For example, 3 tigers, 2 wolves, 1 dragon, and so on. These people are capable of exploding stars. Even if Zhong is here, he still has to retreat. Who knows if there will be any unforeseen circumstances when you go there and meet one of these people. Although most of these people are not evil. But it's really not that easy to compete for century soup in their hands. Maybe there will also be some risks. And these risks, Su Su must also remind Qing and Gan Yu. After all, he doesn't want anything to happen to them either. As for his own safety, there is no need to worry. Because the system initially indicated that when he encountered an irresistible danger in this world, it would instantly teleport him back to Tivat. That is to say, no matter how strong the other party is, there is no way to hurt him at all. In this world, his life has a great guarantee. However, others cannot harm him. It doesn't mean he can't harm the people he brought from Tivat. And with his current strength, he still cannot protect those people. It is precisely these reasons. It was only during Liyue's time that he produced the death disclaimer. After listening to Su Su's words, there was no trace of fear on Qing's face. Instead, he clenched his fist and said with a firm expression. Don't worry, I had already considered it clearly from the moment I signed the death exemption agreement before coming to this world. Moreover, food that comes with risks is more flavorful. Speaking of which, she looked at Gan Yu and said, do you think so, Gan Yu? Gan Yu was quite cautious and hesitated for a moment, but still nodded and said. Well, what Qing said is right. Only food with risks is more flavorful. Although there are risks, we are willing to give it a try. What risks are not risks? In front of food, they are all younger brothers. Especially Su Su said that century-thick soup is much more delicious than lotus root soup. This makes them yearn for it immensely. So that the risk is vulnerable in front of noodles in soup. Besides, what Su Su said was just a possibility, not a risk once he goes. They ignored the extremely low probability directly. Su Su touched his chin and looked at their fearless expression, then said sternly. Since that's the case, let's set off now. If you go now, you may avoid a lot of unnecessary trouble. Qing nodded and said, okay. But by the way, how are we going? Is that place far away? Qing thought of this question. Because as Su Su said, there will be many people competing for century soup. If we go late, there probably won't be anything left. But now, there is no way to reach it quickly. Unless that place is not far. Ganyu on the side also looked at Su Su, wanting to know the answer. Su Su also felt a bit embarrassed. This is indeed a difficult problem. If we go late, we probably won't have any hair left. But at this moment, the sound of the system suddenly rang out. Ding! Due to the host's guests receiving emotional satisfaction multiple times while enjoying delicious food, they receive a reward of Dancing the Sky technique, which increases the element index to 500 points. Upon hearing the sound of the system, Suyu was overjoyed. Has the reward finally arrived? In order to gain a more detailed understanding, Su Su said in his heart. System, open the personal properties panel. Okay, host. In the next moment, only Suyu could see the attribute panel in front of him. Name. Su Su speed. 80 defense. 100 element index. 500 points ability. Dance in the Sky technique prop. Currently unavailable. Chapter 8. Is Su Su a immortal? Seeking fresh flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Look at this line of attribute introduction. What Su Su is most satisfied with is the element index and the dancing technique. When I didn't come to the food capture world before, my element index was only 2 points. But now it has reached 500 points. You should know that the elemental index is actually combat effectiveness. The higher the number of points, the stronger oneself. My current self, not to mention being able to compare with Ganyu and Qing. But it is also stronger than many martial arts masters of Tivat. Of course, this is just the beginning. In the future, just bring more people to taste delicious food. So one's own strength will advance by leaps and bounds, surpassing both Qing and Ganyu is just a matter of time. Besides that, just received the Dance Art Award, which was also Su Su's most surprising achievement. Let's not talk about the significance of the dance technique. At present, it can solve Su Su's problem. Didn't I just think I didn't know how to get to the place with century soup? Now that you have Wukong art, it's not difficult to fly over directly. And the speed will definitely be much faster than others. There is also a much higher chance of grabbing century soup. This is like sending a dozing pillow. At this moment, Su Su's mood has eased a lot. Pinched his wrist and looked at Qing and Ganyu, he replied. The place where century-thick soup exists is far away. But it's not impossible to reach. Upon hearing Su Su's words, Qing and Ganyu's faces lit up with joy, and their small mouths moved as they spoke in unison. What's the solution? Su Su calmly uttered 3 words, fly over. Fly. Ganyu and Qing stared big, somewhat unbelievable. In their impression, flying is not that easy. Even with the wings of the wind, they can only be used for gliding. If you want to fly, you have to rely on the power of the wind. But there doesn't seem to be any wind in this place. Even with the wind, it is very limited and cannot fly wherever you want. And the only ones who can truly achieve flight are probably immortals or gods. But they obviously haven't reached that level. Although Ganyu lived for over 3,000 years, his strength cannot be compared to that of immortals. After all, it doesn't mean that strength comes from living long. Moreover, since signing the contract with Zhong, she has no time to practice. This also leads to her not being too strong. And she's not really that combat type. So, if you want to soar freely in the air, you can't do it yet. Not to mention flying to the far place in Su Su's mouth. Seeing Ganyu scratching her head awkwardly, she whispered. But Qing and I don't know how to fly. Qing was also a bit depressed on the side. I think the plan proposed by Su Su is also too difficult. It doesn't work at all. Yeah, Su Su, we don't know how to fly. Su Su smiled and spread his hand, saying. You don't know, doesn't that mean I don't know? Qing and Ganyu widened their eyes again and said. Can you fly? Su Su nodded and said, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't have proposed this plan to you either. However, although this plan is feasible. But it also depends on whether you are willing or not, whether you agree or not. After all, there may be some physical contact. As soon as these words were spoken, Qing and Ganyu fell silent. His face suddenly turned a bit shy and red. Especially Ganyu, he lowered his head and his mood suddenly became complicated. This kind of thing is very embarrassing for them. About 30 seconds. Su Su saw that they still looked shy and indecisive. He could only speak. Since you're not speaking, I can only assume that you agreed. If we continue to drag on, the chances of century soup being snatched away are even higher. So, it's an offense. After speaking, Su Su didn't care much anymore. Walk directly to the middle of Qing and Ganyu. Then wrap your left and right hands around their soft waists. When they haven't reacted much yet. Directly use the dance technique to lift the two off the ground. Qing and Ganyu's faces suddenly turned red. After all, they have never had such contact with the opposite sex since childhood. Even they feel that there really needs to be people who have such contact. So it will definitely be their future crush. But at this moment, Su Su it made their thoughts a bit confused and at a loss. Seeing that they were still shy, Su Su said. Hurry up, we're going to leave now. Soon, you will be able to taste century soup. This sentence did indeed have some diverting effect. Ganyu and Qing both nodded and whispered. Okay. Century thick soup really makes them look forward to it. It can also help them no longer focus on Su Su hugging them, which is equivalent to successfully diverting their attention. So, let's go. After Su Su finished speaking, he immediately flew up. The place he is going to is an extremely cold place with century-thick soup. Whoosh 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 flying in the air, at first, it was not easy to let off the sunny and sweet rain. But due to chatting in the air. After flying for a while, they didn't feel as shy as before. Instead, it feels very interesting and happy. The feeling of flying is really good, Qing. Yes, the feeling of free soaring is like this. Ganyu and Qing enjoyed the pleasure of flying. When in Tivat, even with the wings of the wind, one could fly. But that's very limited. Being with Su Su was very casual and free-spirited. This also makes them yearn for freedom to fly. Su Su, are you also the holder of the Eye of God? Qing tilted her head to look at Su Su and suddenly asked. For Su Su, she still wants to know more. Especially regarding Su Su's ability to fly. Because she felt that only with the power of the Eye of God could she possibly fly. Su Su smiled lightly, knowing the purpose of her question, and said. No, and flying doesn't necessarily require divine eyes. No need. Qing was somewhat surprised. Su Su explained. In this world, it's not just those with divine eyes who are strong. Many people become strong without relying on the eye of God. There are also many people who can fly without relying on the eye of God. For example, the fairy or god of Liyue. It seems that their strength does not rely on external forces such as the god's eye or god's heart. Ganyu still agrees with this point. Because she grew up with the real gentleman who borrowed the wind from Liyue. I also know that immortals do not rely on the eyes of gods. It can be said that it is optional. It is humans who truly rely on the eye of God. And Su Su said he doesn't have the eye of God. But now it can fly. Is it difficult? Is he a fairy? Or perhaps the strength has reached the level of a fairy. Ganyu thought of this possibility at this moment. Not only her, but also Qing thinks the same way. Because in their cognition, only with strong enough strength can one fly freely like this. P.S. Newcomers and new books, kneeling down to ask the big shots to cast some flowers, review votes, and monthly tickets to support the author. Thank you. Chapter 9 Unless You Are My Wife. Seeking Fresh Flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Or perhaps Su Su relied on the power of the divine eye. Use a skill they don't know in order to fly. Su Su gave each of them a glance. From their expressions and gaze, they also roughly know what they are thinking in their hearts. I think I see myself as a very capable person. More importantly, these two people seem to have a strong desire for flying. Knowing these, Su Su said lightly. In fact, it doesn't require one's own strength to fly. As long as one has a certain level of strength as the foundation, understands the skills of flying, and practices them, then it is possible to fly. Su Su's statement is not false. Among the 7 Dragon Balls, Bidalai herself is not particularly strong. But with the guidance of Sun Wufan, it can also take off. Moreover, what I have mastered is the dancing technique in Dragon Ball. If Qing and her partner want to learn, there is still a possibility of success. This statement made Qing and Ganyu's eyes hot. Really? Qing's voice was a bit excited. Ganyu's beautiful eyes were also fixed on Su Yujun's beautiful face. Of course it's true, Su Su nodded. Upon confirmation, Qing couldn't suppress her inner excitement. She dared not even think about such things before. But now you can hear the possibility in Su Su's mouth. So, Su Su, can you teach me how to fly with Ganyu? Qing requested with some embarrassment. Ganyu also nodded slightly, indicating that he really wanted to learn. Su Su pretended to be a bit difficult, but it took him a while to answer. I'm afraid it's a bit difficult. Upon hearing these words, Qing and Ganyu looked a bit disappointed. But I am still curious about the reason. I saw Qing with a serious expression asking. It's a bit difficult, what does it mean? Is it that my and Ganyu's strength is not enough to learn? The possibility that Qing can think of is like this. However, Su Su shook his head slightly and said. Not really. What is that? Qing hurriedly asked. Su Su looked serious, and said seriously. Because there have been regulations in the family. Only clan members or my significant other can learn. Ah. Qing unconsciously let out an ah, lowered her head, and said with a shy expression. Do you still have such regulations? On the side, Ganyu blushed uncontrollably. What are these regulations? Seeing the two of them looking shy and anxious, Su Su's mouth curved into a wicked smile. These two girls are really fun. Su Su suppressed his smile and continued to joke. So, do you still need to learn? As long as you become my significant other, I don't mind teaching you. As soon as these words were spoken, Qing and Ganyu's faces turned even more terrifying red. Directly from redness in the ears to the neck. how can they answer this special question? Is it the kind of person who gets married and becomes family right after meeting? Seeing the two of them being teased like this, Su Su's mischievous smile grew even stronger at the corner of his mouth. But as he approached the extremely cold region, he didn't want to continue teasing. Immediately coughing twice, he said sternly, "We're almost there. The weather here is a bit harsh, please be prepared." Upon hearing these words, Ganyu and his companions lifted their gaze and looked ahead. Indeed, in front of me was a hazy and snowy mist. Gradually, the temperature is getting colder and colder. Is Century Soup the snow mountain here? Ganyu asked softly. That's right. Su Su nodded and said, the lowest temperature here can reach -100 degrees. Is it -100 degrees? Qing and Ganyu furrowed their brows slightly, and their faces became somewhat serious. Although they are not afraid with their strength and physical fitness. But this extremely low temperature is still rarely heard of. Not to mention being in it now. Whoosh whoosh, a few more minutes. Su Su has reached the sky above the extremely cold place with them. Alright, we're going down now. Reminder. Su Yu and the two of them descended. Phew da da da. The three landed steadily and safely. And Su Su finally let go of the gentle moments of Qing and Ganyu. What catches the eye are the white snow and towering icebergs. The cold wind is piercing and the visibility is also very low. If an ordinary person were here, without good cold protection equipment, they would definitely not be able to hold on for a minute. Sushu and Qing Ganyu are not ordinary people after all. So even without cold protection equipment, I can't feel anything at all. It just feels a bit cool. If you don't want this feeling, you can mobilize your own strength to keep your body warm. Is Century Soup right here? Qing glanced around and asked. Su Su nodded and said. 100 meters ahead, we need to enter a cave. In the cave, that's the century-thick soup we're looking for. Upon hearing these words, the anticipation on Qing and Ganyu's faces grew stronger. My heart is also getting more and more excited. So, let's go. Qing couldn't wait and directly led the way. Duh. However, just as she took the second step. Suddenly, there was a loud bang coming from the surroundings. It seems like a group of animals are running, and the ground is shaking. Upon hearing this sound, Qing frowned and stopped her steps. And Su Su said seriously. Be careful, this commotion may be the beasts here. They seem to be coming towards us. Even if not reminded, Qing and Ganyu probably know. We are now prepared to deal with the danger. Less than a few seconds. Just before the meeting, a group of fierce beasts with blue fur and skin, resembling cows. They are all ferocious, with white anger spewing out from their nostrils. His gaze was very hostile towards Su Su and the three of them, as if he wanted to pierce through them. Su Su looked around a few times and quickly recognized what kind of beast it was. It's a frozen bison, a very fierce beast. Frozen bison. This name makes Ganyu and Qing feel fresh. But they also don't forget the driving elements and prepare for battle. The creatures in this world are still very unfamiliar to them. I don't know how strong it really is, so I need to be careful when dealing with it. There must be no carelessness at all. Just when they are ready. The frozen bison also began to charge towards them, with a huge number. At least 200 heads. Qing was not afraid at all, driving the elemental power, and a long sword appeared directly in her hand. Then his body suddenly charged towards the frozen demon. Ganyu and Su Su didn't wait either, they both followed behind. The three of them rushed into the frozen buffalo herd and showcased their martial arts skills. Qing waved her long sword with lightning, and with one strike, she flipped over one end. It looks like I didn't scratch as much as I imagined. Ganyu used his bow and shot through 2 or 3 heads with one arrow. Their moves are not only harmful, but also very gorgeous. On the contrary, Su Su was a bit monotonous and directly punched hard. However, even so, it was still a punching and a head bending. Puff. 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 Master. 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 In less than a minute, all the frozen bison were solved and fell to the ground motionless. And this, as expected by Su Su. Because he knew that the combat effectiveness of these frozen bison was not very good. The capture level is only 11. That is to say, having a larger quantity can be more troublesome to solve. All solved. Watching all the frozen bison fall to the ground, Ganyu withdrew his bow and came to Su Su's side. Qing also put away her long sword, wiped away her weak sweat, and said, "These frozen bison are even more difficult to deal with than the people of Chuchio." What she said is not false either. The ordinary Chuchio people of Tivat are not so fierce. Moreover, the quantity is still so large that it is indeed difficult to solve. Chapter 10. Crazy Carving Qing, Seeking Flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Indeed, there are too many of these fierce beasts. Su Su pinched his finger and said lightly. So, let's keep moving forward. The vibration caused by the fight just now may attract even more ferocious beasts. Therefore, we need to leave here quickly. Upon hearing this, Qing and Ganyu nodded. Okay. Subsequently, Su Su led the way ahead, with the two following behind. The visibility here is too low. If you don't know the location of Century Soup, it's difficult to get there. Maybe there's a chance of getting lost. Fortunately, Su Su has coordinate information provided by the system. Therefore, it is impossible for him to get lost. After walking for about 5 minutes, I finally arrived outside a cave. Without any hesitation, Su Su directly led Ganyu and the two into the cave. It was also very smooth, and shortly after entering the cave, we arrived at the location of Century Soup. After arriving, Su Su first investigated the surrounding situation. Because prudence can make a ship of 10,000 years. No one knows if someone might have arrived early and laid an ambush here. However, after exploring, Su Su did not find any trace of anyone coming. And he also slightly let down his guard. It seems that we are among the earliest to arrive. Ganyu and Qing also smiled lightly. In this way, they can enjoy Century Soup. I saw that Qing couldn't wait to ask. Su Su, where exactly is the century thick soup you're talking about? Looking at the surroundings, there doesn't seem to be any signs of soup. Even Ganyu doesn't know where the so called century thick soup is. The two of them were staring at Su Yu with confusion at the moment. Su Su walked to the middle of this territory, looked up, and pointed to a giant icicle above, saying, "Isn't that all?" Upon hearing this, Ganyu and Qing quickly looked over. Later, I was also somewhat surprised to find the big icicle. More importantly, there are many ingredients frozen inside the icicles. It's like a natural large freezer. Just as the two were still in surprise, Su Su spoke up. "Quick, Ganyu, take out the container. Century thick soup is about to drip down." Ganyu was a bit at a loss when she was called out like this. Ah. Oh. But soon I realized it. Then, driving the elemental force, take out a container. Then take it directly to Su Su. Taking the container, Su Yu immediately aimed it at the center below the icicle. Century thick soup only occurs once in a century. Su Su cannot miss out on such delicious soup just because of carelessness. Just as he put the container over, the icicles also began to drip century thick soup with a dazzling luster. However, when the soup falls into the container, it becomes invisible again. It can be said that there seems to be no soup in the container. This scene also surprised Ganyu and Qing. They even felt that Su Yu was feeling lonely. Qing couldn't help but look at Su Su and ask. Su Su, didn't Tang miss it? Su Su explained. Don't worry, you must have received it. Just because the soup is too clear for you to see clearly. As soon as these words were spoken, the two of them widened their eyes. Is this soup so magical? Clear enough to be invisible to the naked eye? More importantly, at this moment, there is an indescribable fragrance. He was thrusting into their nostrils. The smell is intoxicating, and there is no meat smell. It seems that these have been removed, and the rest is the natural essence. Qing and Ganyu unconsciously closed their eyes to enjoy. Okay. It smells so good. Even Su Su had an impulse to drink the soup from the container in one gulp. But reason restrained his impulsiveness. Drop. 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 Century-thick soup is still dripping. Although it's just a drop each time, the frequency is still quite fast. Just every time it drips, Ganyu and Qing unconsciously swallow their saliva. Because it's too greedy and tempting. At this moment, waiting is equivalent to torture. After about 10 minutes, the dripping on the icicle finally stopped. It can also be said that there is no more. Su Yu has collected all the essence formed in the past 100 years. Collect, have you finished collecting? Qing's jade hand was placed in front of her chest, eager to try. Ganyu didn't speak, but his eyes were extremely passionate. Now they almost haven't let out the saliva. However, Su Su closed the container containing century-thick soup. Then he spoke in a somewhat serious tone. I can't drink it yet. Qing's eyebrows widened and she looked puzzled. Why? This is all packed in a container, can't we drink it yet? Because it's not safe here. Su Su explained, I estimate many people are coming now. If they run into each other, a fight is inevitable. To avoid unnecessary trouble, let's leave here first. As for the soup, I'll wait until I find a safe place to drink it. This explanation can also be understood by Qing. Just now, it was indeed because she was too greedy and a bit dizzy. I see, it's because I didn't think it carefully. So, let's go. I vaguely felt that someone was already approaching here. On the side, Ganyu frowned slightly and nodded with a somewhat serious expression. There is indeed something approaching. Their strength and perception are still very sensitive. Su Su nodded and said. That matter should not be delayed. Let's go now. Subsequently, the three of them brought century-old thick soup and left the cave. I also quickly arrived outside. But outside is not a safe place either. So Su Su continued to take Qing and Ganyu into the air. Fly back to where the lotus root soup was before. Just before they left. The GT robot from the food fair has arrived. And soon entered the cave to obtain century soup. But I know without saying the result. He was caught first by someone. But there are still many people who are unaware of this matter. Still taking risks one after another, hoping to get a bite of soup. Among them are Aru, Komatsu, and others from this world. And the result is also obvious, they will all return disappointed. I flew for about 20 minutes. Su Yu and the others returned to the lotus root soup. After landing, Su Su and Ganyu went to a naturally formed stone table. Su Su placed the container containing century-thick soup on the table. Ganyu. Su Su looked at Ganyu. Ganyu understood and immediately transformed into bowls, ladles, and spoons again. And Qing couldn't help it anymore. Finally, are you ready to drink? Ganyu also had a look of anticipation and hot eyes. The 20 minutes of flying just now were actually quite agonizing. Now, it's finally the tasting stage. Under the gaze of the two beautiful figures, Su Su opened the lid of the container. Buzzing in the next moment, an indescribable and colorful fragrance wafted in the air. It also once again intoxicated Ganyu and Qing, including Su Su. Su Su is still quite restrained. Temporarily suppressing the intoxication, I picked up a bowl and scooped up 2.5 bowls. Then they each placed them in front of Ganyu and Qing. Ganyu, Qing, give it a try. P.S. Looking for flowers, evaluation tickets, monthly tickets.